Hello there, Inspired Tenno. BARUUK is a, in huge quotation marks, melee-based Warframe. Hey, if you're enjoying the content, why not Warframe.subscribe? It helps out the channel. Now, on with the video. His first ability is Elude, in which BARUUK essentially decides to no longer be corporeal and simply allow the bullets to pass through him. This ability scales on range and it can create a 360 defense, making all attacks pass through him. This is however still his weakest ability, which is why we've replaced it with the helmet system. His second ability is Lull, which creates a zone on the ground, which slows enemies when they enter it, and when they're slowed to 100% they will fall asleep, which resets their alarm level. This also removes BARUUK's restraint. His third ability is Desolate Hands. This creates daggers around BARUUK that gives him true damage reduction, and when near enemies these daggers will also disable the enemy's weapons. This however spends the daggers. Again, this removes some of his restraint. Finally, we have BARUUK's fourth ability, which is his Serene Storm. This unlocks his Exalted Weapon, and this is essentially where all of his damage comes from. This is the ability we will be building around for this video. As mentioned before, BARUUK has an Exalted Weapon, Desert Wind. This is the build I've decided to go with, and before I explain why I've picked each of these mods, let me quickly mention that I'm not using Healing Return and I'm not using Condition Overload. These are very powerful mods. However, BARUUK's attack where he extends an energy wave out in front of him with his Exalted Weapon, these mods do not trigger off that. That's why we're not using them. I've added a few elemental mods just for damage, and the damage type doesn't matter, but we'll talk about that when we get to BARUUK himself. We have our critical chance here, and we're building two critical mods, critical damage specifically, because BARUUK's weapon here scales very nicely with critical chance. You can see here we have a 5-time multiplier, and you'll see why that is. I'm using the normal pressure point, but if you wanted to fight sentience with this build, you might want to use sacrificial pressure as well. That will probably require another Umbra former, so that's very much on the expensive part and perhaps a little bit overkill. Finally, I'm using Berserker Theory because BARUUK really do need some more attack speed, and you will be critting all the time, so you will basically be guaranteed to always trigger this effect. Now for BARUUK himself. As you can see, we're building a good amount of strength on BARUUK, and we're building a large amount of efficiency. What I want you to keep in mind, or rather what you should pay attention to, is the fact that we're dropping our duration. And with this, enemies will not be put to sleep for very long at all, and the zone itself will only stay on the ground for 2 seconds. But that's because we don't really care about the effect of putting enemies to sleep. We only care about removing our restraint, and we can still do this with 100% efficiency even if we remove the duration. This also will actually allow us to cast it more often, as we can build more efficiency this way. As you can see, we have a decent amount of efficiency. I haven't gone too crazy with it. We scale our ability to cast our abilities, I guess, through other means. Range is relatively low. There is really no way to find room to add range onto this build, but even if I could, I wouldn't want to add more range. We don't want our Desolate Hands to have too much range because we don't always want to disarm the enemies. Disarming the enemies means spending our daggers, and we need them for our damage reduction. Most of our survivability comes through this ability. Now the build itself. Here we have Steel Shots. This is great for extra mod capacity, but also it's more melee damage, and that's what we want for this. My only real defensive mod here is Vitality and Adaption. Adaption is pretty much mandatory. You could argue that perhaps this isn't quite necessary, and maybe you could replace it with something else if you were playing a different version of this build, and I'll show you over here in config A later on. Blind Raids and Augur Secrets for all of our ability strength. Efficiency comes through Streamline and Fleeting Expertise. We are running Equilibrium to keep up our energy needs without using the generic focus tree, And finally, and most importantly, we're using Reactive Storm. This augment, and you can read it for yourself, but it allows BARUUK to adapt to the damage type which the enemies are weakest to, and it also gives them a lot of status chance. Remember that status chance and elemental damage are two different things. For the arcanes, I'm using Arcane Strike, which is pretty much mandatory. Am I in the way? Yeah, I am. I'm definitely in the way. Let's remove me. So this here, whenever you crit, which you will do all the time, then you will have a chance to, oh no, sorry, just unhit. So when attacking, this will trigger, and this can trigger off the energy waves. So that's very important. Next up, I'm using Arcane Guardian. And again, I've shown this off many times before, but it gives you a lot of armor, just that little bit of extra survivability. This is not as important, and there certainly are other options. This is quite the pricey arcane, but if you can afford it, I would recommend that you use it, as it's not just good for this build, but for many other builds as well. In terms of companion, you really can bring the companion that you are the most comfortable with. However, do not bring the Smeta Kavat. The charm buff can sometimes give you 30 seconds of guaranteed 200% critical chance. That may sound good, however, it doesn't give you 200%. It sets your critical chance to 200. So, since we will be running around with guaranteed 300% all the time, this will actually reduce our critical chance while this is active. I've chosen to go with the Panther Wolperphiler, and that's partly just because that's one of my new favorite companions. It offers a lot of the kind of utility I would want from a companion. The important mods here are viral quills, which causes your Wolperphiler to shoot out these quills that will apply viral to the enemies. And this here, which when the Wolperphiler dies, it goes into a lava, I guess, and from here it will continue to shoot out quills and then revive itself after 30 seconds, which makes it very low maintenance. I am also using Prime the Pack Leader because we will be causing a lot of damage with melee attacks, which means that we will be constantly healing our companion. I'm also using Animal Instinct. That's a mainstay, obviously always use this. And I like to use Fets as well, just to make it a little bit easier to collect resources, but also to make sure that I pick up the energy orb and health orbs to maintain my energy. Don't use this mod. I only have it on here because I have it leveled up and I wasn't too sure what else I wanted to put on here. And then finally we have Link Health and Mole, both of which are also just filler mods and my personal choice essentially. In terms of companion, you really can bring the companion that you are the most comfortable with. However, do not bring the Smeta Kavat. The charm buff can sometimes give you 30 seconds of guaranteed 200% critical chance. That may sound good, however, it doesn't give you 200%. It sets your critical chance to 200. So, since we will be running around with guaranteed 300% all the time, this will actually reduce our critical chance while this is active. I've chosen to go with the Panther Wolperphiler, and that's partly just because that's one of my new favorite companions. It offers a lot of the kind of utility I would want from a companion. The important mods here are viral quills, which causes your Wolperphiler to shoot out these quills that will apply viral to the enemies. And this here, which when the Wolperphiler dies, it goes into a lava, I guess, and from here it will continue to shoot out quills and then revive itself after 30 seconds, which makes it very low maintenance. I am also using Prime the Pack Leader because we will be causing a lot of damage with melee attacks, which means that we will be constantly healing our companion. I'm also using Animal Instinct. That's a mainstay, obviously always use this. And I like to use fets as well, just to make it a little bit easier to collect resources, but also to make sure that I pick up the energy orb and health orbs to maintain my energy. Don't use this mod. I only have it on here because I have it leveled up and I wasn't too sure what else I wanted to put on here. And then finally we have Link Health and Mole, both of which are also just filler mods and my personal choice essentially. For our focus tree, we will skip out on Generic this time and we will focus on Neremon. This is pretty much mandatory, and it's because of the power spike brands on the skill tree, I guess. What this ability does is when our combo duration runs out, we want it so that we only lose 5 combo instead of losing all of our combo, because it is a little bit difficult to build up combo with BARUUK. On the melee weapon, you need to run these mods, not Blood Rush, that doesn't do anything, but you want to use Gladiator Might, Gladiator Rush, and Gladiator Vice. The reason for this is that the effect of these mods, since they are a set bonus, is global. So the combo duration you have on your desert hands counts towards this bonus. So having these mods in your normal melee weapon will allow you to get more crit chance on your desert hands. In terms of weapons, that's really your choice. However, it's important that you go ahead and you use the secondary dexterity and the primary dexterity. My bad, right? My bad. Primary dexterity. So as you'll see down here, once we are maxed out, then we will get a combo duration increase of 7.5 seconds, and the effect of the primary and secondary does stack. So you get an additional 15 seconds on your combo duration, which makes it much easier to maintain in game. But how do you play BARUUK? Well, firstly you have to realize just how tanky he is. When keeping up all of his tanking abilities, including Arcane Guardian, you will have 450,000 effective health. That's the amount of damage which the enemies have to deal to you before you're dead. Meanwhile, your actual health is only 550, which means that with energy and health orbs, you can very easily heal this amount. Alright, so how do you keep up this tankiness? Firstly, the way that the daggers work is that they give you 10% damage reduction up to a maximum of 90% per dagger. So if you go below 9 daggers, you will start to lose damage reduction. Secondarily, in order to keep adaptation up, you just have to get hit, but that's not gonna be an issue for you as you are melee based, close enough anyways. And finally, by using your ultimate ability, you will be granted 40% damage reduction, and that is also true damage reduction. If we don't consider the armor, as some abilities can go through that, such as Slash and Toxin procs, you still have 130,000 effective health. What you want to do when you first enter into a mission is that you want to use your daggers to give yourself some protection. You want to find a large group of enemies to cast your second ability to remove some restraint, which is the passive bar you see down in the corner. Once you removed enough of this, you want to activate your ultimate, which will then start to drain your restraint. Just keep casting your second abilities occasionally to keep the restraint down. Now, in order to get up to the red crits, you have to build up your combo counter first, and in order to do that, you have to actually hit the enemies. Here I recommend that you use his spin attack, as it gives you some mobility as well as a lot of range in terms of what you can actually hit with it. You want to keep doing this until you hit your cap at 12 combo counter, and then you just want to keep using your normal attacks. If your combo counter is close to dropping down, or if you drop down 5 or 10 combo points, it's not a big deal. Just use your spin attack again to hit a couple of enemies, and then you'll be back up to a maximum amount. A final note is that some acolytes can disable your abilities, and if this happens, then you have to build up your combo counter all over again. You don't want to allow the acolytes to come close enough to hit you with their nullifying aura. What you need to do in order to prevent this from happening is use Ensnare, which is why we've infused it onto this build. It only has a 6-second duration, but that's plenty of time for you to be able to kill the Acolyte. One final note on this build: if you have a different way of dealing with Acolytes, I recommend that you go ahead and replace August Secrets with Transistent Fortitude for just a little bit more power, but no duration essentially. On this version we're running Pillage, simply because casting this on a group of enemies in the steel path will immediately recharge your shield fully, which will make you even more tanky. With the full armor buff of Pillage, you will be up to almost 750,000 effective health. In other words, you will be completely unkillable.